Did you know Tide has been upgraded to provide an even better clean in cold water? Tide is specifically designed to fight any stain you throw at it, even in cold. Butter? Yep. Chocolate ice cream? Sure thing. Barbecue sauce? Tide's got you covered. You don't need to use warm water. Additionally, Tide Pods let you confidently fight tough stains with new Coldzyme technology. Just remember, if it's gotta be clean, it's gotta be Tide.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. There's a book that I turn to time and time again. It's a brilliant people's history, a history directly from primary sources, from diaries, from written extracts of life in the Industrial Revolution, called Liberty's Dawn: A People's History of the Industrial Revolution by Emma Griffin. It's great because it situates the British working class during the Industrial Revolution not as entirely kind of victims of their circumstances, but as human beings with agency in their own right. It's very difficult to do this kind of history, but which is why it's so important. If we take any long and challenging and painful and often bloody historical process, and we examine the people who experienced it firsthand, what we often find is, yeah, things were hard, but human beings have agency to find advantages sometimes, to find ways of surviving, and to deal with the challenges thrown at them. And this is the gist of the book. And today we're looking at the question of child labour in the Industrial Revolution, which is one of the kind. When one thinks of the Industrial Revolution, one thinks of the accounts of Dickens and other people at the time. Child labour is one of the kind of the standout issues, and it was an issue for Victorian social and moral reformers at the time. And also it captures our imagination of what we imagine that era to be. And the truth, the horrible and pleasant truth, is that capitalism was then and is now built on child labour. And vast industrial transformations frequently require it. Emma Griffin writes, "The doleful image of the Victorian child forced to work long hours from a very young age is one of the first things that come to mind when we consider Britain's industrial past. Poets, novelists, essayists and reformers have all played their part in immortalising the plight of the child worker. children crowd the margins of several of Charles Dickens' novels, most memorably, perhaps, in the form of Oliver Twist with his narrow escape as the apprentice of Mr. Gamfield, the chimney sweep. And in David Copperfield, Dickens' semi-autobiographical hero, turned to work as a labouring hind in the warehouse of Murdstone and Grinby at the age of 10. A little later in the century, Charles Kingsley's Water Babies took up the theme of the chimney sweep once again, and whether intended or not, the novel became part of the last push to outlaw the use of boys as chimney sweeps in all its guises. And besides the great canon, a host of more ephemeral novels, such as Francis Trollope's The Life and Adventures of Michael Armstrong, the Factory Boy, and Charlotte Elizabeth's Helen Fleetwood, expose the suffering of child workers to the middle class reader. The industrial novels are perhaps not the finest examples of Victorian literature, but it is nonetheless remarkable privileged writers were so ready to take up their pen for the most powerless members of society. And I think there's something really, really interesting there, in that the market for the purchaser of the Victorian novel in the Victorian era was the middle class reader. It was the well-to-do member of the bourgeoisie who had a kind of almost a slightly kind of anthropological curiosity about how the how the poor lived. I think it is one of the Booth brothers. This is my vague recollections. One of the Booth brothers, Charles Booth, who was the founder of the Salvation Army. It might have been his brother, who essentially said, "Look, you don't need to go and explore the darkest regions of Africa to find this kind of brutal and dark and hidden and strange society. Go to Whitechapel, and there you'll find the lives of the working poor, and they are lives which are beyond the ability your abilities to imagine." Nor was it just the poets and novelists who were offended by the employment of the very young in factories. Many of the period's most vocal and prolific commentators turned their attention to these voiceless victims, the white slaves of England, as they were evocatively and effectively named by the 10 Hours campaigners, those agitating for a limit of 10 hours on the length of the children's working day. The situation of child workers entered the political heart of the nation when reformers such as John Fielden and Lord Ashley, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, took up their cause in Parliament. The year 1833 witnessed the passage of the nation's first major Factory Act, prohibiting the employment of children in factories under the age of 9 and limiting the hours that older children could work. Legislation in the mining industry followed soon after, and the acts were consolidated and amended down the century to further restrict and control the use of children in the workplace. As part of the process of reform, a series of parliamentary select committees were established to investigate the extent of child labour. Their reports, along with the reformers' pamphlets and the lively public debate in newspapers, generated a mountain of documents that none but the most short-sighted of historians could fail to notice. And throughout it all runs a sad tale of exploitation and cruelty, enough to break the spirit of the hard-working child in the heart of the modern reader. For all that, our image of the emaciated child worker has been distilled from Victorian novels and half-remembered history lessons. It nonetheless contains more than a grain of truth. There may be a little mileage to be gained in claiming that novelists, poets, and campaigners were not particularly informed or impartial witnesses, but this line of argument will not go very far in silencing their message. Nor will it do to suggest that children had always worked, and the Victorians at least possessed the humanity and the wisdom to ameliorate their lot. They were, after all, slow to respond to the problem, and many a mill owner made good profits from the children's nimble fingers before anyone was moved to act. That earlier and poorer societies had also connived in the practice must surely have offered no more than the smallest crumb of comfort to those who suffered.
Even the most superficial trawl through the autobiographies quickly dredge up plenty of evidence to suggest that these bleak assessments of the impact of industrialisation on the children of the poor are not simply the bad dreams of doomsayers and pessimists. Time and again, the autobiographers describe a depressingly familiar story of a childhood brought to a premature end by work that was arduous, unpleasant, and often dangerous, by work that started at far too young an age. Here is an example of Edward Rymer describing his first foray into farm work at the age of 6 years old. I was sent to tend the herds of cows and flocks of sheep belonging to Squire Clough. My work being some distance from the village, I sometimes lost my way in the fog and wandered miles shouting or crying for my mother, half blind and nearly heartbroken. Or Robert Collier, starting in the factory at the age of 8, with many more children of my age and older, standing at the spinning frames, doffers they called us, 13 hours a day, 5 days a week, and 11 on Saturday. Rung in at 6 in the morning and out at 8 in the evening, with an hour for dinner and rest. The former child miners provided some of the most distressing accounts of their early lives, telling of how they felt uncomfortable and frightened, working in rough conditions alongside rough men. The hours were so long that they saw no daylight for days on end during the winter months. Little lives of darkness in every meaning possible. But can we do more with the autobiographies than pile up examples of writers saying what we already think they ought to be saying? It was a rare autobiographer who did not devote considerable attention to his experiences from early life. Almost all the writers had something to say about their father, their mother, and their circumstances. Most described their first experience of paid employment, and some wrote at length about the family decisions that lay behind their entry to the workforce. In a sample of 350 autobiographies, this amounts to a very rich seam of information, enabling us to put some figures to the incidence of child labour, as well as to probe the social context in which it occurred. Our writers not only stand testimony to the dark interpretation, but they also enable a much deeper understanding of the complex forces that motivated parents to send their small children out to work. So, this is the value of this kind of people's history, where we can look at bigger contextual pictures. We know child labour is horrific. We know that children working from the age of 6, cattle droving or picking up cotton in factories or down mine shafts is abhorrent to us. But what is the value that we can derive from this is the why. What were the social and economic forces that led to this occurring? I think it's a kind of bit of a lazy argument to say, didn't people in the Tudor era, didn't people in the Middle Ages send their children out to work? Yes, they did. Child labour is a key facet of human history. However, to argue that it was quite the same as industrial child labour is to miss the point. Emma Griffin writes, let us start by looking at the ages at which the young started work, a crude but useful way of contrasting the experiences of children during the Industrial Revolution. Despite the long passage of time that had usually elapsed before our child workers took up the pen, the age at which they started work was clearly remembered and diligently recorded by the majority of writers, a sign no doubt of the significance of this event in any working person's life. Admittedly, some were uncertain about the timing. Those, for example, who informed us that they started work at about this time, now, or at a proper age, are not so helpful as they perhaps intended. A handful of writers did not specify their date of birth, which makes piecing together the most rudimentary chronology of their working life impossible. But for the most part, the transition from school or home to the workplace was something that few forgot, and most writers had little difficulty pinpointing the moment when this important step towards adulthood occurred.
A PSA from Instacart. It's Sunday. 5 p.m. You had a non-stop weekend. You're running on empty, and so is your fridge. You're in the trenches of the Sunday scaries. You don't have it in you to go to the store, but this is your reminder. You don't have to. You can get everything you need delivered through Instacart so that you can get what you really need. More time to do whatever you want. Instacart. For one less Sunday scary, we're here. This holiday season, Instacart is bringing magic to the people who make it magic for others. Get delivery and deals on everything you need this season. Whether it's a last-minute holiday decor emergency, coverage for the holiday party, or just avoiding going out in the cold, Instacart is here. Plus, November 24th to December 23rd is Deal Month, with savings from your favorite retailers and deals on grocery, electronics, beauty, toys, and more. Download the Instacart app to get a little magic delivered today.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
When the ages at which children started work are plotted on a graph, they fall neatly into a bell-shaped curve that one would expect. One child started work at the age of 4, a few more started at 5, and then the number of children in each group rises steadily until the age of 10, at which point the numbers start to fall again. The average age at which the autobiographers started work was also 10 years. The only slight interruption to the curve occurs around the age of 12, when the number rises modestly again. This age was very common for starting apprenticeships, so clustering suggests that some writers may not have bothered to note the more casual employments that preceded their apprenticeship. Had they done so, the average age for starting work would be pulled slightly downwards, though as the rise is small, the effect would be slight. So, 10 years old was the average age for starting work. It is slightly younger than other historians have found, probably because I have been more ruthless in excluding children who did not belong to families that can be accurately labelled as poor or working class. Our criteria, it might be remembered, covers those whose only income was derived from manual labour and those whose income was sufficiently scanty for a period of ill health or unemployment to pose serious financial difficulties. It's also striking that the average age at which children started work changed very little over the period. All through the 18th century until 1850, ages for starting work fluctuated wildly around the age of 10, falling as low as 4 and rising as high as 17. But the average age always hovered about 10. Given the relatively small number of autobiographies that have survived before about 1750, we should not place too much weight on the figures from an earlier period. The wide variety in ages does, however, call out for analysis. What determined the age at which our autobiographers entered the workforce? Why did some start at 5 or 6 and others in their mid-teens or even later? And how could these children's experiences be fitted more broadly into a social history of the Industrial Revolution? Conventional wisdom dictates that the age at which the children started work was connected to the poverty of the family, and the autobiographies lend some support to this idea. Amongst those starting work at the youngest ages were to be found some living in the most desperate poverty. And writers often link their family's poverty to their own early entry into the workforce. Edward Davis, for example, lacked even the bare necessities of life as a small child, owing to his father's heavy drinking habit and the fact that he disliked work exceedingly. Edward gave this as a reason he was compelled to join the ranks of the breadwinners of the family at the age of 6 years and 8 months. At the other end of the distribution, the reverse also appears to be true. Large incomes and small families helped delay the moment at which the child was cast out to earn his daily bread. Richard Boswell Belcher and his 2 brothers were raised in relative affluence by their grandfather
following the death of both parents. He sent them to good schools as boarders, our racket being too much for him. Richard's last school was a first-class school for tradesmen's sons, where he remained studying the 3 R's, history and geography, until the age of 13, and he was taken away to become a draper's apprentice. So the experience of children in the Industrial Revolution is varied. Child labour depends on income. Child experiences depend on income and desperation. The parents who are destitute, whose children have to go out to provide for the whole family. For example, compared to the last example, where there are certain options and certain choices, and work is coming for the child, but they are able to acquire an apprenticeship. And if you get an apprenticeship, you're into the ranks of skilled labour. And one of the great schisms that exists within British working class history in the 19th century is between the needs and the imperatives of skilled and unskilled labour. The kind of artisan labour unions, which were relatively small, and these things like the Boilermakers Union and things like that, versus what was viewed at the time as unskilled work. I dispute that any work is in fact unskilled, but things like kind of dock work and labouring, you can only think of as dock work as unskilled until you actually have to try and do it, and then I think there's probably quite a lot to it that you need to get your head around fairly quickly. So the life chances of children at this point, and this becomes, I think much of this is written before things like the Education Act of 1870, is dependent on the kind of work that's on offer, that's available, that can be accessed.
Here's a 2026 style tip. Shop Hill House Home for chic, versatile pieces. Taylor Swift, Olivia Rodrigo, Anne Hathaway, and Mindy Kaling have. Hill House invented the viral nap dress, which has the most flattering fit. Their timeless aesthetic designs are so comfy and stylish. They make cute PJs, maternity, and kid styles, too. Get 15% off your first order of $100 or more at hillhousehome.com with code NEW15. Again, that's code NEW15 for 15% off your first order at hillhousehome.com.
For 25 years, Brightview Senior Living Associates have been committed to creating a vibrant culture and delivering exceptional services, making Brightview a great place to work and live. If you're looking for a rewarding opportunity to serve your local community and grow, we want you to join our team. Brightview Senior Living is growing and actively seeking vibrant associates to join our community teams, including directors, healthcare, activities, hospitality, and dining. Apply today at careers.brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal employment opportunities. Text BV Jobs to 97211 to apply.
There are also problems with this common sense view that variation in the age at which children started work, writes Emma Griffin, can be explained by the wealth of the families. For there, amongst the autobiographies, alongside families, the families like the Davises and the Belchers, behaving just as they should, were many others who failed to act in the way that common sense predicts. The experiences of George Mockford and John Taylor illustrate the problem. A fair few autobiographers had very little that was good to say about their father, and George Mockford may be counted as one of their number. The great ambition of my father, he opined, was to save money and his children's little strength, and time should be all put to such an account as would be conducive to this end. But even leaving aside the meanness or otherwise of George's father, it is certain that he was a very poor man, struggling to feed a family of 12 children on the piteously small wages he earned as a shepherd. As a child, George's diet consisted largely of potatoes and a little bacon fat, and it's doubtful that his father often ate a finer meal than potatoes with the bacon. Nor was George's family desperately poor. Not only was George's family desperately poor, his father had very little care for their welfare. Nevertheless, George did not start full-time work until the age of 10. So that's late by all things considered. young to us, but not unusual for the period. Not unusual for the period, but actually, given the socio-economic circumstances and the previous examples that we've looked at there, that stands out as a kind of an outlier. Obviously, when we're looking at kind of averages, we're looking at mathematical models, and we'll always know that when we're looking at individual lives and people's histories, come across things which kind of defy mathematical models, that because we're talking about people, not numbers. And so there are always outliers, things that don't make sense, that contradict, because people aren't there for our benefit as historians and history students to simply slot into simple categorizations. And this is obviously the point that Emma Griffin is making. I would, if you are interested in the Industrial Revolution, I would urge you to get Liberty's Dawn. It's a great book. It's beautifully written, but it's an important book as well, because it's about giving working class voices agency. Often people in these circumstances of poverty and child labour were victims of circumstances. But when we hear their voices and we hear their memoirs, and these are all written, obviously, when these children grew to adulthood, it rehumanises them, and it makes them three-dimensional human beings who struggled through difficult and sometimes extraordinary times, and who we need to, in a way, rehumanize, take slightly out of that kind of victim narrative. I'm going to be looking at some more from this, but in the meantime, what I wanted to say was, if you're studying Russian history, I'm just sorting out the kind of technical aspects of it, but I'm going to be doing a live workshop in January. So far, we're looking at January the 11th, but it might be a bit of a movable feast. I will be publishing, I will be kind of putting on the website tickets soon, and when they're ready, I will let you guys all know. It'll be for I think we're looking at like 10 quid for the workshop, which for a good hour and a half, probably 2 hours, is going to get you kind of exam ready for the summer. I think it's a pretty good offer. So more on that when it emerges anyway. So take good care, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. All the best. Bye-bye.
When the flu is keeping you up at night, don't try to tough it out. Knock out your flu symptoms with NyQuil Intense Flu. You got this. It provides powerful relief of your flu symptoms so you can sleep well through the night. NyQuil Intense Flu. The nighttime sniffling, aching, fever, best sleep with a flu medicine. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.